The most expensive warship in Sweden sank after sailing 1,300 meters. Not in a battle, not in a storm. On a calm August afternoon in 1628, in the middle of Stockholm harbor, in front of the crowd that had come to watch her leave, with the king's flagship still close enough to shore that people swam to safety. This is quilled history, the stories the textbooks quietly left out. So how does a state spend years and a fortune building a ship that cannot float upright? Who knew it was unstable before she sailed, and what happened when they said so? And why is the disaster now the single most valuable thing that ever happened to our knowledge of the 17th century? Sweden in the 1620s was fighting for control of the Baltic, and its king wanted a navy that announced the fact. The ship was commissioned as a statement, the largest, most heavily armed, and most extravagantly decorated warship anyone had built, carrying 64 bronze guns on 2 full gun decks. 2 full gun decks was the ambitious part, and it is where the trouble starts. Guns are extremely heavy, and putting a second row of them high up means adding enormous weight far above the waterline. A ship stays upright because its weight sits low. Every gun on that upper deck worked against that. There was no reliable way to calculate this. 17th century shipbuilding had no stability theory, no formal naval architecture, and no drawings in the modern sense. Ships were built by master shipwrights working from experience, from proportions handed down, and from a set of measurements they carried largely in their heads. That method works when you build the same kind of ship you built last time. It fails when someone asks for something bigger than anything that has been built before, because there is no accumulated experience to draw on. This ship was well outside the range where the traditional method was reliable. The master shipwright who began her died partway through construction, and the work passed to an assistant, mid-build, with the specification already changed once by royal instruction. Continuity of judgment, which was the entire quality control mechanism available, was broken. And here's the detail that turns an accident into a decision. Before she sailed, they tested her. The test was simple and standard. 30 men ran back and forth across the deck in unison to see how much she rolled. It was the only stability test available, and it was a good one. After 3 runs, the ship was rolling so violently that the admiral watching ordered the test stopped because he was afraid she would capsize at the quay. 3 runs, in harbor, in flat water. Everyone present understood exactly what that meant. And then she sailed anyway. The admiral did not report it. The vice admiral in charge of preparing her knew and said nothing publicly. The king was abroad on campaign, writing letters demanding to know when his ship would be ready, and nobody in that chain wanted to be the person who told him it was not. On the 10th of August, she set sail with crowds watching and foreign diplomats present. A light gust caught her. She heeled, righted partly, and a second gust laid her over far enough that water poured in through the open lower gun ports, which had been left open so she could fire a salute. Once water is inside, it runs to the low side, which increases the heel, which lets in more water. There is no recovery from that. She went down in about 30 meters of water within minutes, upright, with her mast still above the surface. Around 30 people died out of roughly 150 aboard. There was an inquest, and reading it now is the most modern part of the whole story. Officers were questioned. The shipwright's successor was questioned. Everyone was asked who was responsible, and everyone answered by explaining that they had followed instructions given by someone else. The builders said they had built to the dimensions they were given. The officers said they had sailed the ship they were handed. The specification had been altered on royal instruction, and the king was the one person nobody could blame. The inquest concluded without assigning fault to anyone, and no one was punished. Modern analysis, done on the recovered hull, confirms what the rolling test showed. She carried far too little ballast for her top weight, and adding enough ballast to stabilize her would have pushed the lower gun ports dangerously close to the water. The design had no safe configuration. She could not have been fixed by loading her differently. So the ship sat on the harbor floor. Most of the valuable bronze guns were salvaged within a few decades by divers working in a weighted wooden bell, which is a genuinely remarkable feat for the 1660s. Then the location was forgotten, and she stayed there for 300 years. Now the reversal, and it is the reason this story matters beyond a naval blunder. Stockholm harbor is brackish, cold, dark and low in oxygen, and it does not contain the shipworm that eats wooden wrecks to nothing in salt water. The Baltic is one of the few places on Earth where a wooden ship simply waits. An amateur researcher located her in 1956 by working through archives and probing the harbor bed. In 1961 she was raised, essentially whole, and what came up was not a pile of timbers, it was a ship, with her decks, her carvings, her rigging fittings and the contents of her hull still in place. The contents are the treasure. Sea chests belonging to individual crew members, still packed. Clothing, shoes, hats, wooden plates and spoons, a backgammon set, barrels of food, tools, coins. 6 of the 10 sails, folded in a locker, the only surviving sails of their kind anywhere in the world. And the sculpture. She carried around 500 carved wooden figures across her stern and sides, lions, emperors, mermaids, warriors, and most of them survived. Traces of pigment show they were originally painted in bright colors in gold, not the somber brown the wood has become. Because it all sank on one afternoon, the whole assemblage is a single moment. Archaeology usually gives you a site accumulated over decades, layered and mixed. This is one ship, on one day, with everything aboard exactly where its owner left it. Nothing was tidied, sold, inherited, or thrown away. The human remains matter too. Around 15 individuals were recovered, and modern analysis of their bones and teeth has produced detail nobody expected: ages, diets, old injuries, childhood illnesses, and origins. One skeleton, long assumed to be male, turned out on genetic analysis to be a woman. The carvings were not decoration either, they were argument. The program runs to Roman emperors, Hercules, lions savaging enemies, and a row of grimacing faces meant to represent defeated Poles, all aimed at anyone who saw the ship from a foreign quayside. It is state messaging carved in oak, and it survived because the ship failed. And the people have faces again. Forensic reconstructions have been built from several of the recovered skulls, and they are startlingly specific. A heavyset man in his 40s, a woman in her 30s, a young sailor. Named provisionally by the researchers, they are the only 17th century crew anyone can actually look at. Preserving her turned out to be harder than raising her. Waterlogged oak that dries out shrinks and cracks catastrophically, so the hull was sprayed for 17 years with a synthetic wax that replaced the water in the wood cell by cell. It is one of the largest conservation operations ever attempted. And it is not finished. The wood is slowly acidifying, because sulfur compounds absorbed during 3 centuries underwater are oxidizing and forming acid inside the timber. The hull is also sagging under its own weight. Conservation is now a permanent, ongoing engineering problem rather than a completed project. There is a final irony in the numbers. She was built to project Swedish power across the Baltic, and she never fired a shot in anger. Yet the museum built for her is now the most visited in Scandinavia, drawing well over 1 million people a year. She has projected far more Swedish prestige as a wreck than she ever could have as a warship. So the ledger on this ship is genuinely strange. As a warship, she was a total loss on her first afternoon, an enormous waste of money at a moment when Sweden could ill afford it, and an avoidable one, because the men who tested her knew. As a historical document, she is priceless, and she is priceless precisely because she failed early. Had she sailed successfully, she would have served, been rebuilt, worn out, and been broken up for timber like every other ship of her generation, and we would have nothing. Every other warship of that century is gone. We know them from paintings, from written accounts, from fragments. This one exists, whole, with the crew's shoes still in their chests, because somebody built her wrong. Somebody else discovered it, and nobody was willing to say so before she sailed. History keeps better stories than the syllabus. Subscribe. Next up, our next video.